Slapping a record bill on the world's most profitable company, the EU's competition commissioner has caused outrage not just at Apple, but drawn criticism from US President Barack Obama and angered EU member Ireland, which does not want to collect the €13 billion the EU says it's owed. Indeed, Dublin has said it will appeal. The Commission's decision, while handing down a record-breaking sum, is just the latest in a series of crackdowns on state aid and tax practices across the EU. Last year, Luxembourg and the Netherlands came under fire for giving selective advantages to Fiat and Starbucks, and there are more investigations underway. So are EU countries and companies actually breaking any rules? Isn't tax under national remit, and who is the EU then to interfere? Is the US right that American companies are being unfairly targeted? Well, to give us all the insight in the EU side, we're joined now by EU Commissioner Ms. Margrethe Vestager. Thanks so much for joining us here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, let's start with this Apple case in Ireland. We've heard in recent days Ireland has decided to appeal your decision. Are you surprised?
Well, first of all, it is an obvious right that any member state has to appeal a decision if they find that, well, this is not the way things are. And then, of course, the courts will decide.
So Ireland says it hasn't broken any laws at all. It says, you know, this 13 billion, it says it couldn't have collected in the first place because legally it collected what was due, which was on profits made in Ireland, and it collected those at 12.5%.
Well, that, of course, is the dispute. And everything when it comes to state aid boils down to discussion of whether or not a member state can give a selected advantages to just one company, which is not open to other companies, that be direct competitors or other companies in general.
And you truly believe it was selective? Only Apple could? Because Apple says it paid the 12.5%, which is the standard corporate tax rate in Ireland. So what did it gain?
What we've been looking at is not how Apple organized or Irish tax code as such. This is not of our concern. This is the Irish tax code is protected by the treaty as well as the Danish and the German and the Spanish, etc., etc. Because this is national competence. We've been looking at part of Apple Group called Apple Sales International and another one called Apple Operations Europe. And how do they place their profits? Because they record all the profits of sales made in Berlin, in Rome, in Brussels, in Paris, in a number of African countries, Middle East and India. All those profits are recorded in Ireland. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when they're recorded and booked in Ireland, then how are they to be taxed?
And the question I have then is, because these two subsidiaries of Apple are incorporated in Ireland, but their home isn't in Ireland. So then it's outside of Ireland's remit to collect taxes on it if they're in the Caymans or wherever. If their home isn't based there, is it up to Ireland?
Well, the thing is that Ireland then gave Apple 2 tax rulings to allow them to book the huge majority of profits in a head office that only exists on paper. It has no employees, no premises, no real activities. And that, of course, makes no economic justification for no employees in no offices making huge amounts of money.
So for you, Ireland allowed Apple, if you like, to create a fake company? And that's the problem?
It existed only on paper. And this only on paper company was then not to be taxed, not in Ireland and not anywhere else.
Which is a loophole we see across the world, no?
Yes, well, but this is a loophole allowed by a specific tax rulings, and these tax rulings are by nature to one company. It is one company that asks to have the tax ruling, and then it's for the tax authorities of the member state to give the tax ruling to the company. And this tax ruling then allowed a huge chunk of profits made in all over Europe, booked in Ireland, to go on untaxed.
However, in your ruling, you say that if Apple paid taxes, more taxes to other countries in the EU where the sales were made, or indeed to the US, then Ireland wouldn't need to take back that 13 billion, which the Irish government then says, well, doesn't that mean that the 13 billion isn't ours in the first place?
Well, the thing is, obviously, if Apple had activities in other member states and were not just distributing phones and iBooks and whatever, but had activities, then, of course, the profits would be recorded there. and then the profits would be taxed there, and that would, reduce the profits to be booked in Ireland. Also, if Apple Sales International and Apple Operations Europe paid more to the US part of the company in their cost-sharing agreement to develop the IP, to do research and development, that kind of things, that again would reduce the profits to be taxed in Ireland and make probably the taxes in the States bigger than it is today.
That's an international tax issue, no? Rather than an Irish issue.
It's more an issue of company organisation.
They're using the loopholes.
So yeah, well, you can call it different things, but at least you're organised in a way so that all your sales are booked in Ireland. If you buy a phone down here in Brussels, where we are at Toisson d'Or, contractually, well, you buy it with Cork in Ireland. There are some exceptions, but very few, which means that then the sales will be booked in Ireland and the profits will be booked in Ireland. And that, of course, means that, well, if the sales are booked here and the profits are booked here, then it's supposed to be taxed here as well.
Are you not worried that these kind of rulings could see multinationals steer a little bit clear of the EU?
Well, the thing is that Ireland has a very attractive corporate tax rate. And it's not up to me or anyone in the Commission to question that, because Ireland is completely in their good right to say our corporate tax is going to be 12.5%. It is very attractive. You're in the single market, you have highly skilled employees. In general, in Europe, you find very high quality of research and development. It's a very good place to do business. It shouldn't be the place to do tax avoidance. And the difference between 12.5% and what we saw in some years in the Apple case, an effective tax rate descending from 1% to 0.05% and being as low as 0.005% in some years. Well, of course, it is most attractive de facto not to pay very much in taxes, but still paying 12.5%, it's still very attractive to be there.
You think they'd still come to Ireland? However, another former EU Commissioner for Competition, she now works with ID companies in the US, Ms. Nellie Cruz, she also felt that it was unfair, particularly this retroactive aspect of the ruling, saying, well, if you now go back 10 years and question the deals the Irish government did with multinationals, then you're taking away all power from an EU member state, and how can you do that?
Well, actually not at all, because this is a standard feature of state aid. No matter the form it takes, it is still state aid. And if you have been given a benefit which is not open to your competitor next door or to anyone else in the business, well, then we should take the benefit back in order to restore competition.
But Apple didn't do anything wrong, really. They used a system that was available to them, and as a company, as a business person, that was understandable, was it not?
Well, actually, what I do is not to point fingers or trying to blame anyone for wrongdoing. My task is to make sure that we sort of restore a level playing field, to make things fair, and obviously also to try to inspire for change in the future, in order to have a fair single market and a fair taxation.
Because structures have changed now. Have you any guarantees or insurances that as things are working today, that they are as they should be, if you like? We're not in 5 or 10 years' time going to have a similar case.
Well, all this work started years ago. Mario Monti, my predecessor, was one of the very strong commissioners who put this on the agenda to say, well, we have to start looking into state aid in the form of tax benefits. And therefore, things have changed, first gradually and now faster and faster. And you see the Irish themselves has done away with a feature in their tax legislation being very attractive as how to organize. It's called the double Irish. Mm-hmm. You see changes in Luxembourg. They are also doing away with some of the specialties in order to be sort of more mainstream and more out of the state aid issues. It is still attractive, but they are invoking changes themselves. And that I find very positive. And then, of course, if tax legislation has to be changed, then it's for my colleague, my French colleague, Pierre Moscovici, and then it's by the front door, and it is proposals on the table, discussed by Parliament and passed by the Council.
Well, let me just get your opinion on that idea of tax harmonisation across the EU. Would that not be a major part of the solution to all these things?
It would, but I don't think that it will ever happen. because tax competition on the level of corporate tax, it is so integrated in the understanding of each member state. If you want the Irish 12.5 or 18 or 20 or higher, it is I think part of the European puzzle that even this very crucial thing is by the hands of the member state.
Another thing, of course, Apple just the latest in a series of actions you've been taking. We've seen Amazon come under question, Google 3 times, Starbucks, McDonald's. That's, you know, add to Apple, that's 5 multinationals or originating in the United States. Are there the equivalent European Union multinationals?
Actually, when you break down the numbers, you cannot find a US bias. And I think this is very important. Because obviously I take that kind of accusations very seriously, because it's in our values to be on an equal footing, to be fair, to be treating things equally.
And perhaps they're just at a different stage. There's perhaps more US multinationals across the bloc who can play the systems differently.
Well, I think there can be numerous reasons for it, but I think the good thing is that we have the debate and also that we have more transparency. I personally do hope that the proposal to report country by country the number of employees, your activities, your turnover, the taxes paid, that will sort of change things dramatically, because in a transparent, open society, well, then you know much more about what everyone is doing, both the US multinationals, but also European businesses, of course.
Might we be moving towards a more protectionist EU?
I think that it is completely fair to have self-interest. But what I see is that your own self-interest is best sort of guarded or fulfilled with other people on board. And that goes within the European Union, but I think it also goes globally. If we want good working conditions, if we want the climate deal to come through, if we want environmental protection, then we should work together.
Okay, it's that delicate balance, as you say, within the EU and indeed internationally. Ms. Vestager, thanks so much for your time here on France 24. Thanks also to you at home for having watched. That brings us to the end of this edition.